Hey everyone, it's Bilar, and in this video I want to talk to you about inventory management. So what is inventory management? Well, in Speedrunning and Path of Exile, inventory management is essentially the idea of trying to keep a clean and organized inventory as best you can as you traverse through zone to zone to zone and as you return to town. And the reason why we want to do this is it makes our towns more efficient because we know where things are going to be in our inventory. Say, for example, the things that we want to sell. It also gives us an idea of what currents we have so we can understand what sort of things we can do when we return to town. Say, for example, if I wanted to do a wand craft, I'd like to know before I return to town that I have the currency on hand or the components on hand to do a wand craft, or for example with like a rustic recipe to get increased physical damage on a melee weapon or a bow. Essentially, the idea of inventory management really boils down to making your runs more consistent and efficient through understanding what's in your inventory, where you normally keep stuff, so you don't have to think about stuff quite as much, and you can do actions faster as you're sort of getting to town, and also have a better understanding of what you have when you go back to town. So with that being said, let's talk about how we can go about doing inventory management. So one of the first things you want to think about is having a scheme for where you put items. Now, a lot of speedrunners sort of have a different setup than I may have, but this is how I kind of do it. So the left two sort of columns in my inventory, I always keep for like the common currencies that you need to use during a run. I'll always have my wisdom scroll in this top left corner. I'll have my portal scrolls in the first spot of the second column here. I'll have sort of my full currencies on the left here, and then I'll have like my, shards or component currencies on the right. The one exception to this is chromatics and augs. I keep these right here because these first four rows here, from the chromes to the wisdoms and the augs to the portals, are by far the most important currencies that you'll use in speedrunning, because they're essentially like the foundational currencies that help you get your build off the ground and running. And they're pretty common to get. Now, I say common currency. Elks aren't super common. You will get them by virtue of drops or building one through selling rare items. And getting enough shards. That happens. So it's pretty easy just to keep these two over here, and it makes sense too since you can like sort of build these up, and it's relatively common. For rarer currencies like fusings, chances, jeweler's orbs, maybe a chaos orb, I'll typically keep them in the top right two corners here, and maybe down a little bit more if I need some space. And then I'll also use sort of the right side for like items I want to keep for later that I can't use now. Say, for example, I have like a 4-link, but I don't have the required level for it yet. Might keep that on the right side of my inventory. It's something that I'll know because it's on the right side of my inventory that it's identified already, and it might be something that I want to keep. On the other hand, I also use sort of this bottom right corner for sort of recipe components or crafting items. So you can see here that I have this rustic sash. Like I mentioned before, I might want to do that recipe. You see that I have a whetstone up here. Usually I'll keep whetstones either in the top corner or in this bottom corner, depending on my spacing. You can see I have a iron ring here and some essences, and then I have a green gem. I might use that green gem with the iron ring to get a topaz ring and then make it rare so I can do a wand, scepter, or dagger craft. It all just depends on what sort of build I'm playing and how I want to go about doing it. But this is sort of the setup that I commonly have. And you can see sort of in between sort of the two outer columns here is really where I will have most of the items that I'm planning to vendor. So over here, I'll typically keep closer to my like common currency stack, the unidentified items, and then I'll move the stuff that I've identified over to the right so I know I don't have to hit a scroll with it. Otherwise, say for example, if I don't have scrolls yet, I'll move my rare items over here so I know those are the things that I want to identify. So essentially, it's just me dividing up my inventory with sort of set spaces so I know where things are, so I can interact with the vendor faster and have a better idea of what I have on hand, so I can successfully, make my town trips efficient. So with that being said, let's actually, think about some things that you need to know to actually be able to do inventory management. First, what you'll see with inventory management is that a lot of speedrunners do it on the move. For example, at the start of zones, at the end of zones, if there's a phase boss fight where you have a little bit of like a break where you can do some management, or you might have to do like a run up to a boss like Brutus, those are all great times to be able to do some inventory management. To be able to do this but keep moving, you need to have a move only key on your keyboard binds. So for example, here I have F, I also have W. The reason why you need this is if you try, say for example, picking up an item and moving it around while you're moving with your mouse, it'll drop the item. Instead, you need to be able to use your move only key on a keyboard key to be able to move around still without dropping the item, so you can place it in your inventory where you may want it to go. So that is the first sort of like critical component about how we're actually going to be able to do this. We need to be able to move our inventory around and set things up while we're moving through zones. The second critical component is the timing of when we do so. So we want to sort of do it at the start of zones, at the end of zones, when, there might be sort of like a lull or like break in the action, whether it's a phase boss or, you have a long run up to a boss. Now, some other tips when we're thinking about inventory management is thinking about how we can do it efficiently while we're moving. So one thing is that it's a lot easier to do inventory management when you're moving sort of the way that your inventory is pointed. So here, because I'm moving to the right, it's easy for me to grab items and then sort of reset to be able to keep my leap slamming relatively efficient. If I'm moving to the left, it gets a lot harder because I have to ping my mouse, or move my mouse really, a lot further across the screen anytime I sort of want to interact with my inventory. And you can already see it's a lot less smooth. Now, it gets way harder too when you're trying to move the opposite way of your inventory and you're still trying to, proc onslaught by dropping a frost bomb, armor brand, doing spectral helix, whatever your onslaught skill is. So that makes it also hard. And then another thing to keep in mind is that sort of the travel skills you're using also can make it more difficult. So with Leap Slam, because there's no cooldown on it, I always sort of have to try and get my mouse back to where I want to go before I land, so I'm not sort of just like waiting around to get my mouse in the right spot. It's a little easier with something like Flame Dash because I have the time while it's on cooldown or like in between casts when I'm waiting for the sort of instant version of Flame Dash to come up again for me to manage my inventory. So those are some tips you want to think about. That it's easier to manage your inventory when you're sort of moving a direction where you're near your inventory, so to the right rather than the left, and what sort of travel skill you have also makes a big difference. Finally, the zone you're in also makes a huge difference. So, doing inventory management in something like the coast is pretty easy because the coast is a pretty open zone. An area where it's really hard to do inventory management, it's actually a good spot to practice, is Submerged Passage, because you have all these tight areas, you need to be precise with your skills, there's a lot going on. Typically, Submerged is actually probably the hardest zone in speedrunning, not necessarily because the mobs are very difficult, but because of the inventory management that you have to do while navigating the layout itself, and like the mobs can be a little bit dangerous, so it's just a bit of a hassle, so it's a great spot to practice it. Now, what are some areas where it might be like pretty useful to do inventory management? So off the top of my head with Act 1, I mentioned like the coast. Like if you've done a mule, it's really helpful to organize your inventory. Even if you haven't done a mule, it's helpful to manage your inventory while running through the coast, so you know what you're selling when you get back to town on the first town trip. Another place that's very useful is sort of once you enter lower prison, you have that walk from the entrance to the waypoint. You can take some time to do a few inventory management actions there. The walk up to Brutus. You have like the little Mervale RP phase. Oh, you have the Fairgraves RP phase, which is an excellent time to do inventory management. And it's very important because it's right before you go to town. So one thing you want to think about with inventory management is, okay, hey, when am I going to town, or when can I expect to get a lot of items? So for example, if you're killing some sort of unique monster, let's say in Act 2, and you're killing one of the bandits, you know they might drop like a few rare items that you might need for alterations or something like that, and your inventory is looking scuffed as hell like this. It might be a good time to do some inventory management while you're getting to them or traversing to them to, you know, drop some items that you don't need. So for example, maybe you don't need these 2 blue items that I have in here. You drop those down. And then you can have a better sense of, you know, actually picking up the items you want from the boss without worrying about what's in your current inventory. And on top of that, and the thing I was starting to hit on there, is it's super important to know what is in your inventory before you go back to town, especially if you need to do stuff like buy from the vendor, sell from the vendor, do recipes. So with this mess of an inventory that I have right here, for example, like it's going to be very hard for me to do anything efficient in town. So let's, you know, take an example of something I may want to do. And let me reset coast here so we can maybe do part of it as we're going through and I'm talking about what I want to do. So I have a new coast layout here. Let's say, for example, this character is level 12. At level 12, I might want to go back and do 2 crafts. Pretend I don't have a flat damage to spells craft already on this scepter, but it's just some magic scepter, and I have a non-magic scepter over here. So to do crafts, right, I need 2 alterations, 2 resistance rings, and 2 magic scepters. I have 1 magic scepter, I have 1 alt, I have 1 normal scepter. I don't have any resistance rings in my inventory so far. So one of the things I want to think about as I'm traversing the zone is, hey, how the hell am I going to get this? So if I'm looking here without actually traversing first, I notice that I have this iron ring, right? I know that I can get a sapphire ring, a ruby ring, or a topaz ring from selling an iron ring plus a gem of, you know, the color I want. So here I also see I have a spark that I'm no longer using. Right? It's not one of my main skills. I can sell the iron ring and the spark together to get a sapphire ring for 1 of the resistance rings I need for the craft. Well, I need to plan for how I'm going to get the second resistance ring. So rings from the vendor, if they're normal, or white items, cost 3 scrolls of wisdom. I only have 2, but I can see that there's a lot of stuff in my inventory right now where I might be able to get more wisdom scrolls to be able to afford another resistance ring. So a prime example is I have this blacksmith whetstone. It will sell for 4 wisdom scrolls. I also have these 10 transmutes, which will sell for 2 wisdom scrolls. I have these 3 scroll fragments, and I have a couple flasks that are still in here because, you know, I haven't thrown them on the ground, which will happen sometimes, or I picked them up all along the way and they've just sort of been stuck in my inventory, right? So I might be able to sell these flasks for scrolls to be able to get, you know, just 3, but I also have another issue on top of that. Remember, I have a normal scepter over here that I need to elevate, so I need to figure out some way to do that. I can do that in one of 2 ways, right? Or actually one of 3 ways. I have a transmute here, so I could just do that. That might be the easiest path. I have a chance orb. I could try and RNG it and just get a blue one. Although the problem with using chance orbs on scepters or wands or whatever, or white items, is that sometimes they can go rare and that bricks recipes. Another problem with using that is chance orbs aren't always super common and you might need them for your 28s. So that might be a last resort. And a third option that I have here is actually making this belt rare in doing a rustic sash recipe with the whetstone, an elk or essence belt, and that. Now, that's definitely like the least efficient of, maybe the second least efficient, right? I'd rather do that than use the chance orb, actually, because it guarantees a blue for me instead of the chance orb maybe giving me a yellow. But the best way for me to do this is almost certainly going to be just transmuting it, right? So I have a plan to get this transmuted. I have a plan to get one resistance ring, and I have a plan to potentially get another resistance ring through getting enough wisdom scrolls from the vendor. Now, the one final problem I have is I have one alteration already. I need two. So this is the thing where, you know, having a good setup inventory will obviously help, because if I've set up my inventory such that I know my rares on the right, I can just identify some rare items instead of having to, you know, mouse over this and see which one's which. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go through the zone and we're going to try and get some of these things organized so that by the time we get to the waypoint, we'll be able to have the inventory all nice looking and managed. Because you typically, you know, will walk through coast at this point, since you don't have a travel skill, that's what we'll be doing. So as I start walking, I'm going to hold down my move only button. I'm glancing at where I'm going every once in a while as I navigate, but otherwise I'm trying to get my inventory as clear as I can, as best I can here. So you can see that I'm moving some stuff around to where it normally is, you know, where I normally like it. And it's a process because there are a lot of items here that I have, and it's not always easy. Here, I'm going to pull off this iron ring and put it next to my spark, so I know that's going to happen. I have a random skill gem that I took off that I can put back in a weapon to make things easier. And you can sort of see how it's already coming together. Now, I won't be able to do it as well as I want, but this is like a pretty good approximation of a cleaner inventory. I haven't identified anything yet, but I know from moving a few things that I have two rares here and a shield over here. So let's identify those two. We'll go back to town, go to a vendor, and see if we can start getting closer to where I want to get with these items. So I'm not super close, which means I'm going to sell those two, the 10 scraps, and I'm going to identify two more rare items. I'm going to sell all my white items that I have in here, including my whetstone. I now have my two alterations. I will up this. I'll pull this off. Then I'm going to be looking for a sapphire ring. There isn't one here. I have 5 scrolls anyways. I have 2 dead blue gems. I'm going to sell this LE Prolift, so since I don't need it anymore for my build, I'll get a second sapphire ring. I'll pull these both down, and then I will sell these to get my 2 items. Then my inventory will be looking relatively good, and as I'm running to, you know, the waypoint, or as I'm running to the next zone, I will finish up just getting my inventory set. And if I have singles like this, I will actually move them to the left so they're not stacked awkwardly. And this might be what my inventory ends up looking like as I'm traversing zones through the rest of the acts. And you can sort of see how I went through that live. And it's just a good practice to, you know, go ahead and do that. So that's pretty much, you know, what I would say is inventory management. And again, to go over sort of like where I keep things, this is like how I go about doing it. But inventory management is really about improving your consistency in runs by letting you know what items you have and your efficiency in runs, because once you get to town, you know what to sell, where things are, and how you want to go about planning sort of your town trips. So inventory management is super important, and it's a great skill to pick up, but there are different ways of doing it. So I don't want you to think like it's an exact science. Everyone has a bit of a different approach to how they think about inventory management. And it's a skill that's going to take a long time to really build up properly because of how intricate it can be, really, and how much work it can be. And one thing that you might want to keep in mind is that there is a thing as too much inventory management. Say, for example, if you're traversing through a zone and you're trying to focus too much on getting your inventory managed at the wrong time. Say, for example, it's a particularly dangerous zone, say like Vol Ruins or Riverways in Act 2, you might get splatted and your run might be done because you were trying to do inventory management at a poor time. You also might run into troubles with over inventory management because it might, make it so you're not XPing quite as well in zones. So it's not all like roses and rainbows with inventory management. There are some downsides with it, and it's a balance between trying to find a good time to do it where you're still going to be able to XP efficiently, still going to be able to traverse the zone efficiently, and still going to be able to be relatively safe. And by doing all these things, you should be able to give yourself a great foundation to improve your consistency and efficiency in runs. All right, thank you for watching.